Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. Humans have been telling stories for tens of thousands of years. That's because our brains are hardwired to engage with narratives we read and hear. That makes storytelling extremely effective when used with purpose and direction. It can inspire people to want to change their lives, but only if it connects with them emotionally. To tell us more about how to tell compelling stories, I invited David Bossert. David Bossert is an award-winning artist, filmmaker, and author. He was a longtime animator at Disney who worked on iconic films such as The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and The Nightmare Before Christmas. He's also written several books, such as Remembering Roy E. Disney, Dali Disney Destino, and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, The Search for Lost Cartoons. David is going to share his creative process and what he learned about the key elements of storytelling while working for Disney, one of the most renowned storytelling companies. He also talks about the power of stories to evoke emotion and how to apply it in our own projects. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to like, rate, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks. Hello, David. How are you doing today?
Very well. It's wonderful to be here and nice to be on the Dreamcatcher podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we're so excited to have you on. I appreciate you taking the time to be here to share your vast knowledge with all of us. And I have to start off by saying that I am a huge Disney fan. Like so many other millennials, I grew up watching all the classics. So I'm super excited to know more about how you played a part in creating the magic and how it added to your own experience and skill set.
Absolutely. I mean, I worked at the Walt Disney Animation Studios for just over 32 years. And,
Wow.
I started out as in an entry-level position as what's known as an in-betweener. And then I quickly became a special effects animator, a supervising animator, a visual effects supervisor, artistic coordinator, and then I eventually became a producer, creative director, and headed up a special projects group at the studio, and did work all over the company and consequently all over the world.
That's amazing. So you're absolutely prolific in terms of the scope of the work that you've done.
Yeah, I was in a very interesting position when I headed up the special projects group because I had an opportunity to work with partners, and I had a wonderful team of people that I worked with, and we got to work with partners across the company in all these different divisions, including parks and resorts and Imagineering and music and consumer products and gaming and publishing and just across the board. So it really gave me an interesting skill set in dealing with all these different business units.
Nice. I actually spoke with the former VP of Imagineering, Joe Garlington. Did you ever work with him?
No, the name doesn't ring a bell for me.
Okay, great. I was just curious because I had a great conversation with him too. All right, David. So let's dive in. As you mentioned, you have done a bunch of things at the Disney company. I mean, you're an animator, you're a writer, you're a producer, and a filmmaker. So tell us what your creative process is like. How would you describe it?
Well, I mean, I think everybody works differently. Everybody has their own way of approaching things. My process is one of really total immersion into whatever project I'm working on. And I have to say, I work best when I have multiple projects going at any given time, because I can really focus in on one project and work on that to a point, and maybe put it aside and work on something else. But even though I put that other project aside, it's sort of still percolating in the back of my mind, and I'm working on it almost subconsciously, and so I get to go from one project to another project and back again, as I'm working, and that just works for me. I often tell people that it's a constant creative thought process. And even when I'm sleeping, I'll think about a creative problem as I'm going to sleep, and in sure enough, the next morning I'll have some sort of solution or at least next step, and that's just my process. And I never accept no. When somebody says no, we can't do that, I have always been conditioned, and I think it's because I worked at the Walt Disney Company.
I know, I was just gonna say, because
Yeah.
wasn't Walt Disney like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've
Yeah.
always been conditioned that you never say no, you can't do that. You always think in terms of how can we do that? How can we make that happen? And so that's always been my mindset, and it's worked well for me.
That's great. So you're not multitasking, right? You focus on one task at a time, but you kind of leave it, you put it to the side and you work on a bunch of other things.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was heading up that special projects group, I had anywhere from 15 to 18 projects going at one
Whoa.
time, and
Yeah.
and
That
and
I was
so
thinking more like 5 or
no, but having that many projects really was exciting for me, because I could really put 100% into each one as I spent time on each of those projects. And again, you're constantly thinking and looking at ways of doing things. If you hit a stopping point or a breaking point that feels natural, it's easy to put something aside. I do the same thing with my writing now. Oftentimes, I have multiple book projects going. I'm doing research on some of the projects. I'm writing on a project. I may put the writing aside on one project to pick up writing on another project. And I find it very stimulating creatively to work that way.
right. And I know you work on your own now, but when you were working at Disney, were you kind of brainstorming and problem solving with other people?
Oh, absolutely. I have to say, anything that I worked on at the Walt Disney Company, it was always a team effort. You had the people you're doing a project for at another division. You had them weighing in on what it is they wanted to have done with the particular project that you were involved with. The projects themselves were big teams. When we did the World of Color outdoor show, it was a big outdoor projection fountain
Yeah,
show
yeah.
at
Hmm.
California Adventure.
Yep.
It was a huge team of people. You had a show director, you had a show producer, you had engineers and computer programmers, you had lighting specialists, you had
Wow.
so many different disciplines that come together that are able to create that kind of a project. I mean, I was the creative director and producer of the animation projections that went on to the water screens in that particular show. But that was a small part of a bigger team of people.
Okay. So, how did you make that transition from working at Disney with all these different professionals to working on your own?
Well, it actually overlapped, because
Oh, did it? Okay.
yeah, I wrote my first book, Remembering Roy E. Disney.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years before I left the company, and I don't like to use the word retired, because to me,
Okay.
I feel like I shifted gears, and I went from one thing to the next. I closed
Yeah.
one
Yeah, I hear
chapter and
you.
I went on to the next chapter, and so I've been writing full time, and for me, The difference is that I get to pick the projects I want to work on. I get to pick the things that are most interesting to me. And, whereas I think when you're working at a company, there's some projects you get involved with that you are sort of, this isn't that exciting. I'd rather not really be working on this, but I have to because, it
Yeah, I'm
has
sure
to
a lot
get
of people
done.
can relate. A lot of people can
Yeah, and
relate.
I think regardless of what you do for a living, every
Yeah.
one of us who works at a company or had worked at a company had those moments where you're working on a project that you'd rather not be working on, and and so now working for myself, I get to really just pick those projects that are really are exciting to me and the projects I really want to work on.
David, I mean, you had a pretty sweet gig. You actually worked as an animator during the golden age of animation at Disney in the 90s. You worked on iconic films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and The Nightmare Before Christmas. I can't even imagine what it must have been like to be, in the midst of all that. That excitement and all the innovative ideas that must have been floating around. So tell us, what was that experience like?
Well, the one thing I would say is that when you're in the thick of it, you're just working on a movie. You don't know if it's going to be a hit, a classic. You don't know if it's
That
going to
is true.
resonate
That is
with the
true.
audience. And you're more focused on hitting deadlines, because, they decide, hey, that movie's releasing, in November of this particular year, and you've got to get that done because they've locked in their release date to the theaters. And so, I think when you're in the middle of it, sometimes you get a sense, wow, this is a really good movie, or, I hope this does well because I really like the film. But you really don't know, and you're so focused on doing your particular discipline for that movie, and you're working with hundreds of artists that are being led by a directing team or a director and a producer. And so for me, you hope it's going to be a hit movie, but you're focused on getting the movie finished. And the one thing that I learned is that you never finish these films. They're works of art. You can tinker with things in a movie until doomsday. And we used to have a saying that we never finished the film, we just released it, because you had to put a movie out there. And oftentimes with Disney animated films, 5 or 10 years later, they'll do an anniversary release, or they used to do an anniversary release on
Right.
DVD. And
Yeah.
oftentimes
I remember that. Yeah.
they would add a sequence back in that was cut when the movie was first released.
I remember that. Yes.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
I think like on Pocahontas, there was a song called If I Never Knew You. That was this wonderful love song between John Smith and Pocahontas. And the director, one of the directors, Mike Gabriel, loved that song. And they ultimately cut it out because when they did some test screenings, the kids in the audience were getting fidgety during the love song. And so they wound up taking it out. But for the 10-year anniversary, we actually finished it, and they put it back into the film for an anniversary DVD release. So, I mean, part of that is the marketing thing to get people to buy the new DVD because it has a new sequence and song put back into the film. But the other aspect of it is that the filmmaker, the director, really wanted that in the movie, and he got his chance to put it back in.
I see. So you were really focused on the work as opposed to how the movie would be received.
Absolutely. I mean, because that's out of your control.
But I'm sure you had some, I don't know, some intuitive feeling that you're working on something magnificent, something that's just
I
larger
think
than
though,
life.
yeah, but you know, again, I have to sit there and say, like, when The Lion King was in development at Disney Animation, there was skepticism as to whether that was going to be a good movie. No, but there was a lot of artists who didn't want to work on The Lion King. They wanted to bypass it and go on to early development of Pocahontas, which was the
Okay.
movie that came out after it.
After that, yeah.
And there was a lot of early story problems, and there was change out of directors, and you know, there was a lot of issues with that film, and ultimately it gets released and becomes one of the biggest hits of all time.
Yeah, even
You know?
the movie that was made recently, that
Yeah.
also broke all box
Yeah,
office records.
the Jon Favreau version.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, Jon
Yeah,
Favreau.
and you know, look, you just don't know.
Yeah.
You know, you think the film is going to be great, or early on it's got a lot of problems, so you're kind of, you know, skeptical. And you know, animators and artists are wanting to work on films that they think are going to be a sure thing or are going to be a hit, because clearly nobody wants to spend 2 or 3 years working on a film that goes out and is a dud at the box office or is forgotten. And we were fortunate in the 90s that we worked on so many films that really, you know, resonated with audiences.
I think later on, though, I think it kind of took a downturn, and that's why they kind of switched to more like Pixar.
Yeah,
Pixar
but
movies,
you
right?
know
Yeah.
something. I think though that
With Tarzan and The
yeah,
Emperor's New Groove, which I personally love, but
yeah.
I don't know, for some reason it wasn't successful.
Well, you know something though. Again, I think that you have to look at anything is cyclical. And I could look at the entire timeline of Disney animation from Snow White to you know, the films they put out this year, like this past year, Encanto or Raya and the Last Dragon.
Which did
I could
really
look,
well, and
yeah,
Canto. Yeah.
I could look at the entire timeline
Yeah.
and plot out a cycle where, you know, you have a period of hit films and you have a period of films that aren't really that well received at the box office. It's a cycle that goes through, just like there's business cycles, just like there's economic cycles. There's cycles at Disney Animation like there are anywhere else, and there's peaks and valleys.
That's an interesting observation. I know that in the 40s or was it the 50s, Dumbo, and there was another movie that really didn't do well at the box office, but they say that's because of the World War
Well,
War. They lost the European audience.
yeah, I
Right?
mean, when you look at you know, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was off the charts,
Yeah, it was off the
of a
charts. Yeah.
success, because it was the first animated feature film that,
Yeah.
you know, played in theaters and really, you know, tugged at people's heartstrings.
Yeah.
I think that when you look at Pinocchio, which is a masterpiece in my mind artistically, it didn't do as well at the box office, but part of that's attributed to the fact that it was released during the beginning of World War II.
Well, yes.
And so they started losing box office revenue in Europe as the war spread. And so the same can be said about Fantasia, Bambi, and Dumbo from that time period, because the war was raging by the time those films were released. And you know, again, if you lose 1/3 of your box office revenue, you know, that's significant. You know, and those films shouldn't be judged based on how they were received initially, because of those factors. So, but you know, again, you go through these periods where you know, the 1940s, because of World War II, there wasn't as much feature production. But then at the end of the 1940s, you had Alice in Wonderland. 1950, you had Cinderella.
Cinderella.
Yeah, and then you had
Sleeping
Peter
Beauty.
Pan. you had Peter Pan and Lady and the Tramp, and then
Yeah.
Sleeping Beauty.
Okay, you're the Disney historian here.
Yeah. So, you know, you have to look at what's going on in the world,
Yes,
and also
that
what's
makes a
going
difference.
on in the company as well. You know,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there was, you know, sort of a softness in animation after Walt Disney passed away. You know, so
Yes.
you know the last feature film he was actually hands-on involved with really was Jungle Book.
Oh,
And
that was the
after
last one? Okay.
that he
Yeah.
was, you know, personally involved with. And then
Uh-huh.
after that, you know, you had these other films that came out, Sword in the Stone and things like that, that didn't quite
Mm-hmm.
do as well. You know, they were just softer at the box office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And did you work closely with Roy Disney? I mean,
I did know Roy very well,
okay.
and he was executive producer on a number of projects I was involved
Mm-hmm.
with, including Fantasia 2000 and Destino, the
Mm.
short film. So I really had the pleasure of knowing him and getting to work with him and travel with him a little bit
That's wonderful.
over about a 20-year period. So
And did he share a lot of stories with you about Walt Disney, the man
yeah,
himself?
he did. You know, he
Yeah.
did, and I asked him a lot of questions. You know, especially when we were traveling, we had time to just sit, you know, and chat. He was a very down to earth individual, and incredibly nice and generous, I have to say.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, and Walt Disney, I mean, he was a prolific storyteller, and he was able to really, really move people with the storytelling that he did. And I know you've written a lot about the secret sauce of Disney.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us what that is and what that constitutes?
I think for me, the classic Disney animated films are timeless and they transcend generationally. You know, if you watch Bambi today, it resonates today as much as it did when it first came out in the early 1940s. And I think that, you know, these films, they speak to hope, that there's a better tomorrow, that will get through whatever difficulties and obstacles, you know, that we encounter, and essentially live happily ever after. You know, I mean, that's to me kind of, you know, where those films fall. And so I think, you know, the key is that they're timeless and transcend generations.
Yeah, I agree. And do you think it's also because a lot of them follow the narrative of the hero's journey? I mean, we see that in almost all of them, especially
Yeah,
the
I mean,
classics.
you know, of course. I mean, when you look at you know what the elements of great storytelling are, you know, there's you know the characters, the setting, the plot, the conflict, and the
Yes.
resolution. You know, for the Disney animated films, it's about creating endearing characters,
Yeah.
both heroes and villains. You know,
Yeah, because some
there's
of
a
the
lot of
villains are
are
likable.
likable.
Like
Yeah, they're
I
absolutely
really like
likable.
Hades from Hercules. I
Sure.
mean, he's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know that is, you know, part. You know, these characters are part of a compelling story. They're set in a world that you know, the audience want to spend time in and also visit again. You know, because that's one of the things about the classic Disney animated films is that it's not just watching it once, it's watching it multiple times. It's going back and revisiting the film
Exactly.
periodically. And
Yeah.
all of us do it. All of us who love movies, you know, go back and watch favorite films again and again over years, to refresh our memories. And
You get a different layer of understanding as you get more life experience. Like there are some pretty deep themes in some of these movies, you know, which kids would not be able to
yeah.
pick up on.
Absolutely, and I think that's also part of the success of a lot of the Disney animated films is that they play to different age groups and different at different levels. You know, there's material in these films that hit adults that go over the heads of kids, and there's equally amounts of material that hits the kids, and of course resonates with the adults. And a lot of these films, people have watched them when they were growing up, and now they're sharing them with their own children. And I think that's, again, something that's really important with these types of films, is that they do transcend generations.
Right. And what is your opinion about the live action movies that they've recently started making? They've done Beauty and the Beast, they've done Aladdin, The Lion King, as we just talked about,
Cinderella.
the Cinderella. What are your thoughts about this? Because they have embellished the stories, they have made them more contemporary. So what are your thoughts on those movies?
Look, I think that I've seen a lot of them, and I know that there's been backlash from fans that say, why are they doing this? Why don't they do original stuff and this and that? But I have a different view on it. I sit there and say these are great stories that the company has told in one medium, and they're telling them in another. And when you look at a film like Lion King, you can watch the original animated film. You could go to Broadway or to a theater anywhere in the world, really, and see The Lion King on stage. It's a different interpretation, but it's a beautiful interpretation that I've enjoyed very much. You could go and watch Jon Favreau's version of The Lion King, which is, really maintain the integrity of the original animated.
It didn't
film.
change a lot. He didn't change a lot in terms of the storyline.
But it's a different, it's a different take on the story visually. And so what the company's doing is it's giving the audience choice. It's giving them a choice to see these great stories in different ways. And so for me, that's a choice you as the audience member makes. If you're a diehard fan of the animated film and don't want to go see the quote live action, which was really a very realistic CG version, obviously, if you don't want to see that, then you have a choice of not going to the theater to see it. But clearly the fans of The Lion King wanted to see it because it was a huge success at the box office, and people want to see it live on a Broadway stage because that's been running for more than 20 years. In fact, I heard a great statistic that the Lion King Broadway show and its traveling companies all over the world has grossed more than all the Star Wars movies put together.
No way.
Yes way. Because it's been running for more than 20 years. Continuously.
Star Wars?
No, yeah. I'm talking The Lion King has been running for more than 20 years on live stages all over the world, and it's grossed more than all the Star Wars movies put together. Yeah. It's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
It's made billions and billions of dollars. And so I think that, again, the company is putting out these stories in different ways to give the audience choices, and choices to see the same story in different ways because they enjoy those stories. And that's the magic of it, And by the way, if people don't want to see something, they'll let the company know through the box office.
Or social media.
Or social media,
because I know that a lot of people are not happy with the casting choice for The Little Mermaid. I don't want to get too much into it because it's a bit controversial, but who they chose as The Little Mermaid because of the way she looks. So I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I don't normally pay too much attention to that kind of controversy because
Yeah.
these are people that are armchair quarterbacking
Mhm.
decisions, and I'm going to wait until the movie comes out, and I'm going to judge the movie not based on how somebody looks, but based on how they perform the role. And that's really
Right.
what we all should be doing, is we should be looking at things through that lens.
I agree. But is
Let
that in integrity with the story though? I mean,
yeah,
that's what
but
they're questioning.
again, I'm not gonna pass judgment on it until I see
Yeah.
the finished product. All of these people are second guessing. They're picking so and so. Why are they picking that person? They may not like that person for whatever reason. I want to wait until I see the film on the big screen, and I'll walk out of the theater and I'll say, well, that worked really well. Or I'm going to say, I don't know if that was a good choice. You know, I mean, I didn't particularly care for Will Smith as the genie in Aladdin, in the
Yeah, I
live
think
action version of Aladdin.
he had big shoes to fill.
Right,
So
absolutely. But
like
in my mind, I thought the actor who played the genie in the original Broadway production of Aladdin would have been a much better choice, but he didn't have as big a name.
yeah, that's true.
And so they're making those decisions based on who's gonna,
E-
they
Even with
want a
Emma
name.
Watson. Yeah,
Yeah,
Emma Watson for Beauty and the Beast.
right.
I thought they could have found someone who looked more like
But
Belle, but
yeah, but they're making choices for marketing reasons, and
I picked up on that. Yeah.
as a draw to bring people into the theaters. They want to have a big name attached to it or whatever. But those are the things that they have to make those decisions. They're the ones that are making the film, and ultimately that will get released to theaters, and it'll be the audience who will tell the filmmakers whether they were successful or not.
So let's get back to what it was like working at Disney. I'm curious, David. Um, was the fact that there was a change in leadership, um, did it impact the way all of you worked and just the general atmosphere of the company? Because I know when you first started, Michael Eisner was the CEO.
No,
And
actually, when I first started, Ron Miller was the CEO. It was
oh,
before
was
Michael
he? Oh
Eisner
my
and Frank
God,
Wells came
that
in. Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Oh, right.
So
So you've
yeah,
been through
oh
three
yeah,
of yeah,
absolutely. And I
yeah,
think that I think when there's a major leadership change out,
yeah.
there's certainly a shakeup that happens, and you always hope that it's going to be for the positive.
Hmm.
I think that when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came into the company and brought in people like Jeffrey Katzenberg and others, there was sort of this positive reawakening, if you will, of the company in general, and certainly of Disney Animation, and that was a very positive thing. I think though that people are often afraid of change, because you're sort of upending what the norm had been, and you're making
Hmm.
changes. And certainly I think there was some fear and uneasiness about the management changeover. But ultimately, when you look back, you sit there. I mean, that management changeout was precipitated by Roy Disney, and he was the one that engineered it with his business partner Stanley Gold, and brought in Michael Eisner and Frank Wells. And if that hadn't have happened, we might be looking at a very, very different Walt Disney Company today. And so I sit there and embrace change, because I've always wanted change, because change is exciting. There's always something new to learn. There's always some new thing you can do.
So, David, let's get into storytelling specifically. I would love to know what do you think are the elements of a great story?
Well, I think I touched on it. To me, it's the characters. it's the setting, it's the plot line of the story, what the
Mhm.
conflict is, and the resolution. You
Okay.
know, those to me are really the five basics of storytelling. And again, it's about creating these endearing characters, and putting them in a compelling story in a world that, in a world that could be a fantastic new environment that the audience has never experienced before. um, those are the real keys to it, I think. And today, when I see animated films coming out, there's a lot of humanoid characters, a lot of human characters. So much so that you wonder why they're even doing it animated. You wonder, with these human characters, why wouldn't they just do it live action?
Could you give an
So
example of a movie that's like?
I think that some of these films like Raya and the Last Dragon or Encanto, have a lot of human characters in them, and there's also some fantastic creatures and things like that. But for the most part, they're human characters, and with the technology today, and the way they're doing, these Marvel superhero movies and things like that, you can pretty much do anything you want. So I sit there and would say, like, I would look at a film like The Mitchells versus the Machines, which came out not from Disney but from Sony, as an animated film that was cartoony. It had elements of computer animation. It had hand drawn animation and design elements that you wouldn't have seen in a live action film. So I sit there and look at the Mitchells versus the Machines as, okay, that's a great animated film that I really enjoyed. But then I look at a film like Raya and the Last Dragon, and I think to myself, well, you could have made that as a live action movie. And maybe Disney will make it as a live action movie, since they're doing all their other animated films as live action. So,
Do you think they could
so
have done that as feature?
absolutely, as a live action film, absolutely, yeah, without question. The whole thing with the dragon,
Yeah.
spinning up in the air. I mean, there was a similar thing in Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, the Marvel film, which was a live action film. There was a whole thing with a
Yes.
dragon escaping at the out of a cave. I mean, that's all CG animation. I honestly, Raya and the Last Dragon could have been a live action film with CG enhancements.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Um,
how I
I
view it.
I guess you would be able to notice all those nuances because of all the
Yeah,
experience you've
yeah.
had.
But that's really, the basics of a great story are really going to be the characters, and the storyline, and the environment that you put it all in. I mean, that's really what it's going to be.
Yeah, and I've noticed that the type of stories that Disney movies tell, it's kind of evolved as society has evolved. It's no more all just romance, right? Like for
Right.
instance, with Frozen, it was like the love between two sisters.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, women empowerment. I mean, that's become a huge theme. I think that started in the 90s itself because you started having these
Sure.
very strong women characters. So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So, what are your thoughts on that? On how the stories have evolved with the times?
Well, I often think that you have to be able to evolve in your storytelling, and certainly, that evolution could be a bumpy road. There's certainly stories that are coming out that they're experimenting with. They're wanting to try out. They're pushing the boundaries on, and they need to do that. And I think that having diverse characters. in diverse settings, touching on things that are important to audiences today. You have to evolve and keep on top of those types of things. But at the
Mhm.
same time, to me, it's a fine line, because you don't want to be forcing messages into films. It really should be a very organic thing in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. And they've also, I noticed that, especially in the movies in the 90s, like there were very standard archetypes. You know, you had the hero or the heroine, you had the sidekick, the villain, the jester. And that's also changed. Like who seem kind of eccentric and who
Yeah,
don't kind of fit the mold.
sure. And I think
So,
I think part of that is you don't want to be formulaic. So you want to
so
try
they've
and break,
changed that
yeah,
too.
yeah, you want to try and break out of these molds, and try new things and try different types of storytelling. I think you have to do that, because if you fall into that rut of formulaic storylines, it gets old after a while. And your audience will know, your audience is going to get tired of it at some point. So you do have to be able to be conscious of those things.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if Walt Disney was still alive, like how would he do things? I'm sure that's crossed your mind too, right? Like how would he
Well,
respond to all the technology and the,
listen. I mean,
you know,
there's always that question: what would Walt have done?
what
And
would Walt have done? Yes.
yeah, and anytime I've heard that, I would always respond: Walt would not repeat himself; he would do something different. you know
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and that was something he was well known for, was he didn't want to repeat himself. He didn't want to keep doing the same thing. And I think that's really important. I don't think that you can keep just regurgitating the same storylines, the same type of things. So
And how involved were you in the theme park development of the Disney
well,
parks?
I mean, the only involvement I had on the theme parks was on specific attractions that were new and being designed, and we were part of. Whether it was
Okay.
the Dwarf Mine Coaster, or the World of Color, or Paris Dreams. A lot of the outdoor projection shows I was involved with. Um, and so, again, you're constantly trying to do something different that the audience hasn't seen before. And even with the animation projections we did in World of Color, we wanted to present familiar, iconic scenes from animated films, but in a different way. And a good example of that is in Bambi. There's a sequence with Thumper and Bambi on the ice, and it's a series of short scenes strung together, lots of cuts. And we wanted to present that differently, and actually strung together some of the original animation, but did bridge animation between some of the scenes to create it as one big scene of Bambi and Thumper on the ice. So it was something the audience was familiar with, but it was being presented in a way they hadn't seen it before. And I think that's really important to do whenever you're working on a project that is going to repurpose material from one medium to another.
Okay. So create a unique spin on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some people would have just taken the animation clips and thrown them up on the water screens, but taking that extra step of presenting it differently than what they were used to seeing in a film, I think makes that particular show and that particular moment more exciting.
Yeah. They did that for Fantasmic too. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
I did a little work on Phantasmic
I love that show.
with
I
with
love
with
that show.
with restoration of some of the
Yeah.
animation that was in that show. So
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a spectacular show. Um, So, David, you also written a bunch of books, and I'm just going to name a couple of them here. You've actually written a book, a biography of Roy Disney. You've written a book about Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and the lifelong friendship and collaboration of Salvador Dali and Walt Disney. You've written a book about that too. So, what was your research process like, and were there any common themes that you discovered during your research?
Well, I mean, any book that I work on, I do an extensive amount of research, as much as I possibly can, and I'm pretty good about digging out material that people haven't seen before, and I think it's exciting for the audience to be able to see, even in a book, something that they haven't seen before or read something they hadn't known before. And so, for me, each of these stories is unique, and each, in a sense, highlights some sort of life lesson. I think, for example, my book on Roy Disney was written to give those that didn't know him a sense of who he was as a man, and the fact that he had the last name Disney, the fact that he was incredibly wealthy, grew up with privilege, really, to some degree, but was grounded, was almost a regular person, if you will. And one of the things I learned from being around him was he treated everyone the same. It didn't matter if it was a security host in one of the buildings, or the president of the United States, or royalty. He treated everybody the same, and he was decent and respectful, and a good person. Um, I would sit there and say, like, if you look at my Oswald the Lucky Rabbit book,
It's interesting
uh,
that you chose Oswald. I mean, and for everyone who doesn't know, Oswald is pretty much the predecessor of Mickey Mouse, right? I mean, he was. Am
yeah,
I correct?
he predates Mickey Mouse, and if it wasn't for Oswald, there probably wouldn't be a Mickey Mouse. And,
Correct, because they
and,
stole
and
Oswald, right? Yeah.
well, they didn't steal him. I mean, everybody thinks that Walt, lost Oswald because somebody stole it. Walt never owned Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. His The producer of the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons was the guy that owned the rights to Oswald. Walt didn't own the rights, and
That's
so
right.
he lost the contract to do the Oswald cartoons, and because of that, he vowed he was never, he would always own his own characters. He was never going to not own his characters. So because he lost the contract to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, he and Ub Iwerks developed Mickey Mouse and created the first three Mickey Mouse cartoons, and the rest is history after that.
And didn't
Because
the wife
Walt, yeah,
suggest the name? I originally he wanted
yes.
to name the mouse Mortimer, right?
Yeah, Mortimer Mouse, and it was
Mortimer.
Lillian, Walt's
Yeah.
wife, who suggested Mickey,
Yeah.
and so he loses the character, and because he didn't own it, and he vowed going forward he would always own his characters, and that led to the creation of Mickey Mouse, and really the shaping of a family entertainment empire. So I think there's valuable lessons in each of those. Dali and Disney
Yeah.
Destino.
Tell us about that because I didn't even know they worked together.
Dali and Disney Destino is really about the enduring friendship of these two great 20th century artists, and a collaboration that was ultimately completed 60 years after it was started. And so, for me, again, that story had not been told in its entirety, and I was fortunate enough to be the person to tell that story. And and again, for each one of my books, I've chosen it because it's a story that hasn't yet been fully told, and I'm interested in telling those kinds of stories. So, if there's any common theme in my books, it's that of discovery, I guess. Um, and and that's what excites me, is that I don't want to, how many books on Bambi can you have? How many books on Sleeping Beauty or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs can you have? I mean, they've been written about at nauseum, and I just feel like I want to pick topics on things that people haven't heard about and that might be of interest to them.
Right, but I would imagine that your readership would be very niche, because they would have to be familiar with these characters and these people, you know?
Well, I think a lot. I think a lot of what I've written about, I wrote a book, Kem Weber, Mid-Century Furniture Designs in the
Yes,
Disney
yes.
Studios. I mean, that's really about the mid-century design period. It's about the specific 22 pieces of furniture that Kem Weber designed for the various disciplines within Disney animation. And
what was
uh,
significant about it?
well, the significance was it was form and function. He designed these desks for different disciplines within the animation process. So an animator's desk was different from a layout artist's desk, which was different from a background painter's desk or an ink and painter. Each desk that was designed had input from the artists that were part of that discipline. So you wound up having each desk that was specific to a task that was being done or a discipline within the animation process. And so to be able to write that book was really to it was sort of a love letter for me to the furniture, because I'm still working close to 40 years now on a desk that I'm sitting at right now, a 1939 Kem Weber animation desk, which is where I write my books.
Antique.
Yeah, the studio gave it to me when
Oh,
I
that's so
retired,
nice. Yeah.
and this is where I write my books. But I sit there and I sat and looked at this desk one day and wondered if anybody had documented this. And I wanted to actually write that story and interview artists of the different disciplines that worked on these different desks, so
Mhm.
that it was, in black and white. There was a record of it, because 50 years from now, these are going to be collector's items that nobody's really working on anymore. And they're going to wonder, why was there a metal strip over here on the desk? And, why was it designed this way? And, to be able to document that, I think is an important thing. And some people may say, "Oh, that's a niche topic." And I had somebody say that about the book, but guess what? The book won six. It went out and won 6 awards, and it's a consistent seller, because it's not just about people doing animation. It's people who are interested in mid-century design.
Got it.
It's people interested in history.
Yes.
There's a wider audience out there than what people would sort of sit there and think right off the bat. If you look at Dali and Disney, it's of interest to people who like Salvador Dali's artwork. It's of interest to people who like Disney and Disney history. And,
And
each
art.
one of the, yeah, each one of these
Yeah.
topics may on the surface feel like there's a niche audience to it, but there's actually a broader audience underneath.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. So, just one last question before we end our conversation. David, do you have any advice for our listeners who are looking for inspiration, who want to just get a jump start on their creative process?
Well, look, to me, inspiration is all around us every day. I'm inspired all the time. I'm inspired when I read something interesting. I'm inspired when I go to a museum or a concert. I think, you have to open yourself up to the world out there. And again, most people are conditioned to say no, and close themselves off to things. Every time I have thought about doing something, I follow through on it. I do a personal retreat every year for a week or two, up in Maine, northern part of Maine, and in the northeast of the United States, and I sit by myself out in nature, looking out at the water, with a notebook, and I remember one summer probably 10 years ago, I sat, and I wrote out a list of books I'd like to write. Well, I've crossed off, half the books on that list because I've written them. And we all know people that go, someday I'm gonna, or I wish I could, or something along those lines. You always hear people say, oh, someday I'm gonna go visit, Greece, or someday I'm gonna go do this, or someday I'll learn how to paint. Well, instead of waiting for someday, just do it, and that's what I do. If I decide, oh, I'd like to write a book on that topic, I go and write the book, because that's the book I want to read. And again, I would say people are conditioned to say, no, you can't do that, or how, I don't think I could do that.
They're
You go,
distracted too. Yeah.
yeah, you have to go figure it out.
Yeah.
You have to decide what you want to do. We're all in control of our own lives. We can decide whether we want to do something or we don't want to do something. We are the ones that can decide, someday I'll go do that, or we can say, I'm going to do that in 3 months. I'm going to make the reservations and I'm going to go visit that place. Or we can say, I'm going to learn how to paint, and we put our mind to it and we do it. We're the only ones. No one can control us. We control ourselves, and we determine whether we want to do something and do it, or whether we just wish we could do it. And that's really the bottom line for anybody out there. If you want to put your mind to doing something, go do it. I've had people tell me, no, that's not going to work, and I've gone and done it myself. With my Dali and Disney book, I want to just give your audience a little example here.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
When I was writing the Dali and Disney Destino book, I had it in the back of my mind. I wanted people to see the short film. Destino's a 6-minute short. And I wanted people to see it. And as I was writing the book, I kept thinking to myself, why can't we put the short movie in a book so that people can have the full story, but they can also watch the movie in a book? And I went and built a prototype because I thought to myself, I want to put the movie in a book. The technology exists, but nobody's actually applied that technology to putting it in a book. So I went and built a prototype with somebody that I cold called over at the Imagineering division, and I talked to somebody who was a display expert, and we mocked up a prototype, which I still have here in my office. We mocked up a prototype, and then I shot a little 1-minute video on my iPhone where I held the book up and said, I want to do a new book where we put the movie in the book. And I opened the cover of the book and I pressed the button and the movie started playing on a screen. And I sent that 1-minute video off to the publishing group and said, I think we should put the movie in a book. We could do it. Here's an example. And like 5 minutes later, oh my God, we have to do this.
Wow.
It took 2 years to put the manufacturing process in place to do it, but we wound up doing a book with the movie in it. And albeit it was like a $250 book, but when you open the book and press a button, the movie starts playing. And
I'm having a tough time picturing it. Is it like a pop-up sort of?
so what you're seeing here is the movie. This is the short Destino, which is playing inside of a book. Can you see that?
I
So I'm not
can.
going to play the whole short,
Yes.
but if I just press that button, it shuts it off, and it's a regular book. You know.
And are there any other pages, or is that?
I'm sorry.
Are there? Is there more, or is it just okay? So then it goes.
So the whole book is in here.
Oh.
So you can read the whole story about Destino in the book, but then
Wow.
you get to see the movie right there.
This is so amazing. Like it would be such a great coffee table book. I mean,
Yeah, and I sit there, and this was the product of just sitting at my desk writing a book and saying I want to put a movie in the book and creating it. So even though it hadn't been done before, even though people were skeptical and they're like, I don't get it, or I don't think that's going to work, or we did it, and it was hugely successful. It was a limited run book with the movie in it, and it sold. And so I sit there and say, anybody who says no to you, yeah, look, there's absolutely crazy ideas that aren't going to work. But if you really have your heart set on doing something that you think is going to work, this is how new products are designed. This is how people pitch new ideas, and it's always going to be the situation where, wouldn't it be great if somebody invented X? Wouldn't it be great if somebody created? How many times?
yeah, I felt that about the iPod. I felt that about the
Yeah.
iPod when
Yeah.
I was like 12, back in the 90s.
And it's one of those things where you sit there and say, oh, it'd be really great if somebody created X, Y, or Z. Well, why not you be the person that creates X, Y, or Z? Because you just had that idea, now follow through on it. And that's really what people have to do. Is you can't wish for, you can't say someday I will. You have to just go do it. And that's all I would leave your audience with is, get up every day, be excited about what you're doing, and follow through on those things you want to do.
I mean, that is such a powerful way to end our conversation. David, you should consider doing a motivational book.
but by the way, I have one written.
You do?
I have one written that deals with my process of doing a personal retreat every year. And I'm refining that and reworking it. But eventually that's going to come out because I've already written a rough draft of it. Now I have to go back in and rewrite it, which is part of my process, and refine it. And, that'll come out in the next year, 2, or whatever. So.
Yeah. I mean, you should. You have a treasure trove of experience and knowledge, and that I'm sure so many people will benefit from. So looking forward to that book.
Yeah. And listen, Nike has it as their logo. Just do it.
Just do it.
And that's really, it's so powerful because, again, just go do it. Don't wish. Don't think you're going to do it someday. Make today the day. Just go do it.
And how do you deal with limitations like resources and things? I think because that's, people have those limitations that like rear its head up, like when they think about the possibilities. I mean, I know that happens to me. Like
where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
When I did my Kem Weber mid-century furniture designs for the Disney Studios, that book was the first book. When I pitched it, I got told basically no, that it was too niche of a topic and they wouldn't sell enough books. And I said, I'm going to go do it myself. I was going to do it anyway. And what I did was I crowdfunded a portion of the book, meaning that I wanted to do the book as good as any publisher could put it out there. And in order to do that, I had to learn about the process, and I wanted to make sure that there was going to be enough people who would buy the book. So I crowdfunded it by saying, do you want to reserve a copy of this book that's not written yet? And that was the first time I did a crowdfunding for a book project, and it was hugely successful. And I
That is
completed the book.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's a great
completed the book.
strategy.
But there's a lot of ways to overcome those obstacles that you just have to think about it. When somebody says, "Well, I want to do this, but I don't have the resources, I don't have the money, I don't have this." Well, all of those things you can figure a way around, and you can go figure out how to do it. And in the process, you're learning how to do these things. I had written a bunch of books and they were published, but I didn't really know how to create a book, like publish the book, have it printed, and all of those things. I learned all of that stuff. All of this stuff is available to people. You just have to go look and find the information and figure it out. And there's really not a lot in the way of obstacles. Now, look, if somebody out there says, "Well, I want to create a brand new car," well, the barrier to entry of creating a brand new car is very high. You need, tens of
Unless you're Elon
hundreds of-
Musk.
you need hundreds of millions of dollars to do it.
True. Yeah.
And by the way, Elon Musk was very successful because he was one of the guys that started PayPal early on. And so he made millions of dollars, and he had a track record, so he could turn around and invest some of his wealth into creating Tesla. And because of his past success, people were willing to put money up to be investors early on and make that happen. Well, you have to figure out how you are going to go about creating whatever it is you want to create.
Yeah, start somewhere.
But you have to start someplace. But if you start with, "I want to create a new car," well, you have to realize the barrier of entry to that world is hugely expensive and very high, and you may not be able to do it if you have no track record. But if you want to learn how to paint, or if you want to write a book, there's ways for you to do those things that are completely accessible to you, that are available. I mean, there's so many free resources online. I mean, you can learn how to paint just by watching YouTube videos.
That's true.
And
they have websites like Skillshare. I'm not getting paid for this, but they have websites like that.
But there's so many different online resources that are either free or cost a small amount, that will allow you to learn whatever it is you want to do.
Well, David, I mean, I don't know about everyone else listening, but I'm super inspired talking to you. Thank you so much, David. It's just been, I mean, we could talk all day.
It's absolutely my pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me on Dreamcatcher. I really had a wonderful time talking with you, and the one thing I would say to people is that if you want to find out more about my books, I have a lot of free articles and whatnot on my website, davidbossert.com. I'm sure you'll put that in your show notes.
I will.
davidbossert.com. There's about 60 articles up on various aspects of animation and movies and
super
Disney.
Interesting. I had a chance to read some of them, and definitely recommend checking them out.
And that's all for people to read and enjoy. And I would just say, go out and make a difference. Do it. Just do it.
Just do it.
Follow your passion.
Absolutely. All right, David. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. It was great talking with you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.